My name's Cooper Schouten. I'm first and foremost a beekeeper. I'm a bee researcher. I work at Southern Cross University in northern New South Wales. So I'm up in Lismore. We've got a nice honey flow happening at the moment with the Melaleuca on the coast, which is good. We've still got drones. You still make queens this time of year. Very grateful to be up around this part of the world. I am the director for a research group called Bees for Sustainable Livelihoods research group. And we work really closely with the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, which is a part of our foreign affairs, DFAT policies and our international sort of development programs. We have a website if you're interested in checking out more of what we do. We're not an NGO, we're a bunch of researchers doing beekeeping research. And the idea is to work with local people on problems that matter to those industries, with outcomes for those countries, as well as back here in Australia as well. So we're not an NGO just going overseas and doing a training. And it's not like we're saying, this is, the highway, this is the best way to do beekeeping necessarily. It's really about working with local people on what works best for them in those countries. I originally got passionate about beekeeping when I was doing my undergraduate studies at uni. I had done a little bit of beekeeping during high school, but I went and worked for a commercial beekeeping operation out near Grafton. We were managing 5,000 organic certified hives. And I just really fell in love with being out in the forest. I continue to practice what I preach. And it's really important to be able to relate to the people that I work with. That I manage bees myself. I've only got 40 production colonies at the moment, and I'd like to expand that. But I think I need to get a truck. More specifically, I need a loader because I'd like to use my back in the future. But another thing that I've always been very passionate about, in addition to the environment and studying the environment, is poverty. So ever since I was very young, this is something that has troubled me. And it doesn't sit well with me that there are so many people that go to bed hungry every night in this world. There's 1.3 billion people that are living in extreme poverty in this earth. They live on $1.25 US a day. So that's more than 3/4 of the world are living in poverty. They're extremely poor. And most of these people, they're dependent on agriculture. So most poor people live in rural areas. So the best way to get them out of poverty is through agriculture. So after my undergraduate degree, I went and did my honours degree looking at beekeeping in Timor-Leste in Indonesia. So beekeeping isn't just about Apis mellifera in Langstroth boxes. It's also a plethora of other types. 20,000 different bee species around the world. We've got 7 different honeybee species, depending on how you look at it. But there's amazing different beekeeping systems going on out there that are really supporting communities and the environments around them. This is honey hunting with a giant Asian honeybee, Apis dorsata binghami in Indonesia. I'm zooming in on this photo with a huge lens. This guy's really high up there, probably 50 meters up in this tree with no safety ropes, and he borrowed my veil for that day. Usually they don't have a veil, so it's pretty wild stuff. You can read a lot more about that here in this paper around the role of honey hunting in Sumbar, Indonesia. Also working with Apis cerana. I know it's a pest that we have here in Australia, but actually for a lot of people where this bee is native to throughout Asia, it's actually a really important source of income for them. They get appreciable incomes from managing Apis cerana. Very low honey production. It's not something that's going to really happen here, but doesn't mean that it's not important in those areas. So it's also a paper that you can read more about that, but I won't chew your ear off any further about that because we're going to be talking mostly about honeybees, Apis mellifera, as you guys know it. So after I did that work in Indonesia and Timor, I went on to do my PhD, was living in Papua New Guinea. I've been up there. I've lost count of how many times I've been up to PNG. I've lived and worked up there with a number of different NGOs, Market Development Facility, Oxfam, and that sort of thing, and also for private sector, managing a bunch of different beekeepers up there and producing honey and packing and selling throughout the country. So from that has stemmed more work after I finished my PhD, and I've now got projects that are in Fiji and Papua New Guinea and starting projects in Solomon Islands. And these projects are trying to improve the productivity and profitability for these beekeepers overseas and create more opportunities for the participation of women and families in those countries. So working in the Eastern Highlands province of PNG, it's very interesting, different situation up there, and also in Fiji. So these are government to government agreements. They're signed off in cabinet. So this is strategic importance to our Australian government when it's signed off as well as theirs. And by no means are these projects that I'm working on the first project. So there's many projects that have been happening, not necessarily bee research programs, but lots of development interventions, you know, like aid programs trying to help beekeepers. I'm sure lots of you may have been overseas for beekeeping before. There's been lots of programs that are trying to help beekeepers in developing countries. It's been happening since, you know, the 1930s when bees were originally introduced throughout the Pacific, because in the Pacific, you don't actually have any honeybees that are native to that, similar to Australia and New Zealand, right? They're introduced. So why are these programs getting involved in bees? Well, I don't have to convince you lot why beekeeping is a really great idea. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but there's actually a lot of things that beekeeping has to offer that, as an intervention to help people out of poverty in developing countries, that most people don't recognize or don't think of immediately. So obviously pollination is really, really important. We all know that, but even in society here in Australia, when most people say bees, they think honey, but it's our responsibility to also keep in mind that it's not just the $256 million industry of honey, it's a $14.2 billion pollination sector. And so pollination in developing countries for food security, but not just having heaps of food, it's also about nutrition security. So no one needs bags and bags of rice. That's not necessarily going to get, you know, you very far in life. Just like you and I, we need to eat a diverse diet. So it's about food and nutrition security. So pollination, it's also bees produce a lot of other products, you know, propolis, beeswax, and you can value add to these to make a whole range of different stuff. You don't have to own land. That's something that's really important. Land tenure is very complex in a lot of developing countries. And obviously, there's a lot of capital outlay when you first start your beekeeping business, but for a lot of smallholder producers, once they've got the outlay of their beekeeping equipment, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time, and it doesn't necessarily cost a lot each year to reinvest back in that business to make a good profit in comparison to other livelihood opportunities. There's some papers that suggest, I don't know how many beekeepers you have online here that are commercial, that are moving bees, but for any of you guys that are stationary, and I don't know if you're marketing this as a part of your product, but there's actually papers out there that suggest that some forms of beekeeping that are actually not migratory, so you're not using a lot of diesel moving bees around, can actually be almost carbon neutral, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, beekeepers have a lot of incentive to look after forest areas, and deforestation in a lot of countries, including Australia, is a major problem. And often beekeepers will lobby to protect those forest areas if they are, you know, obviously part of their bottom line in generating a lot of honey. It's a very stable food product. So you could imagine, like, if you produce 50 pumpkins, what are you going to do with them? Well, you've got to sell them pretty quick. They're going to go off, right? So honey doesn't go off very fast. It's a very stable food product. It's one of the most stable food products in the world. You can find it in the ancient Egyptian catacombs, and it's still technically edible. I wouldn't eat it or recommend it, but it's technically still edible. And so that's really important. And it's actually, there's another layer on top of that, in that the research that we've been doing is demonstrating that in these areas where you don't have access to financial services, people are lining up to sell their honey in times of financial hardship. So it's acting like a form of a bank. It's creating income smoothing. That's really important. I mean, if I said to you, you've got to have all your cash in your pocket, what do you think would happen? It'd be pretty wild. You'd probably end up losing all your money. Also, bees are highly productive in very diverse climates worldwide. So there's a lot of impacts that climate change is having on trees and flowering events, and also on beekeeping industries across the planet. But also, bees probably have pretty good potential for climate change adaptation. And obviously there's a lot of medicinal value. So lots of different benefits in addition to honey, obviously, around why beekeeping is great for development. And because of this, we're seeing loads of beekeeping development programs going out there, people doing training. But what we're seeing, and what I looked at for my PhD, is why these programs work and why these programs don't work. If you give 100 beekeepers some beehives and a week of training and come back in 2 years, you'd be lucky to have a couple of them left. 85% attrition. So attrition amongst beekeeping adopters is a really chronic problem. Colony losses are high. Production and income from beekeeping is pretty inefficient in a lot of these places that we're working. So when my PhD was looking at is, if you're going to develop these programs, and I apply this to my own beekeeping operation too, there's these key pillars that you need to take into consideration, because honeybees, just like any other type of livestock, need to have access to these things in order to be successful. So the first one is education, training and extension. These are the social dimensions. And then you've got these more technical dimensions around nutrition, pest and disease, genetics and technology. So I was going to chat to you guys around these pillars I was going to leave technology out at this point in time, but I'm just going to go for those first four. So honeybee nutrition: no trees, no bees, no honey, no money, right? So bees get their primary protein source, amino acids and vitamins, minerals from a lot of the pollen that they're getting. Nectar is a primary carbohydrate source that they're getting. And not all trees are of equal value to bees, as you guys know. Some are not angiosperms to begin with. They're not flowering plants. Some trees produce a lot of nectar, but not much pollen. Some are vice versa. Some produce both. And not all pollen is equal, right? So it's just, some have really good protein content. Some is not that great. Some trees flower every year or all year round. Some flower every second year, or some trees even flower every 5 years. So it's highly diverse in terms of flowering. And why is this important? It's important because ultimately, you know, you need to know that expansion of your brood chamber that you're looking at is really a response to genetics in your queen bees, but it's largely a function of what's happening in the environment around you. It's nectar and pollen availability that's influencing your management. So when can you make splits? When can you make queens? When are you going to harvest? When should you get your equipment ready? When, you know, how much honey are you going to leave on the hives? How are you going to, you know, there's so many different elements of understanding nutrition and flowering that is really critical. And if anyone hasn't read it already, there's a paper out there by Doug Somerville called Fat Bees, Skinny Bees. I love the presentation. The last one that I heard him do was Fat Bees Make Money. That was a pretty interesting title, but there's a lot of really interesting concepts in here to understand around supplementary feeding and honeybee nutrition. So we're working with beekeepers to understand that in the Pacific, and also for our researchers here in Australia. It's capacity building for us, people, you know, employed through projects here in Australia that go over to do this sort of work as well. The next one is honeybee pests and diseases. So there's more than 40 different pests and diseases of honeybees globally. As we know, we don't live in a, you know, in our little areas where our bees operate anymore. We're a massive global ecosystem. There's stuff moving everywhere. I'm sure you've seen trucks going up and down the highway. We don't see all the boats going across the ocean, but I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And so what we're really trying to do is work with beekeepers to be able to identify, monitor, and manage different pests and diseases. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about doing research to understand how much do these management options cost, how effective are they, what's going to happen to the quality of our bee products, are there resistance problems? We're talking about varroa. You know, how much does it cost to do that? Are there going to be resistance issues potentially in the future, depending on how you treat, if that was to get away? Education around how to use different management strategies, how complex they are. There can also be human safety aspects to different management and that sort of thing. So we basically, the take home here is that we can't expect honeybees to be healthy and happy and productive if we just stick them in a paddock. And obviously, I know you all know that, but there's a lot of people out there that end up with honeybees, including in Australia and overseas, and expect that it's just, you know, very simple process of making honey. We need to be able to look out for these different pests and diseases in order to make sure we're not impacting on our own bees and also those beekeepers around us. We work with endemics, so endemic meaning that we've got pests and diseases that are already there. And we're also talking about things that are not there. So obviously we have some of these things in Australia, some of these are not. Small hive beetle, we've got hornets, we've got the Asian honeybee, Apis cerana down the bottom. Does anyone know what that one is down the bottom there in the middle? Does anyone want to take a guess what that bug is?
Oh, so some form of tick.
Yes, it is. It's very similar to varroa mite. So varroa mite is in the top right, and that one down the bottom there is Tropilaelaps. And I thought this might be the case, and so I'm actually going to got 2 more slides on this bug. What about that bottom one at the right? For anyone wondering, that rainbow bug there, that's the structure of deformed wing virus. And so when you were talking about mites and ticks, essentially, this is what they're doing. They're parasites, they're ectoparasitic mites. It's not just about them biting the bees. It's also about all the viruses that they spread. So how bad is a mosquito? How bad is a mosquito with malaria? Pretty bad. This is the same thing for mites. So you can kill all the mites in a colony, but you still have this amplification of or noise impacting on that colony after there's no mites because you've got a virus loading. So it's something to keep in mind too. So Tropilaelaps mites, I encourage you to pronounce that, Tropilaelaps. Say it to yourself, Tropilaelaps, and now you've said it and you'll be able to remember it. So where is it? I mean, everyone's heard of varroa, right? But no one's talking about this bug, and this is sort of emphasizing just one of about 100 other things that are going on in the region around us. So this is the distribution currently of Tropilaelaps. There's a number of different species, Tropilaelaps macidiae, Tropilaelaps couleriae. These two are known to reproduce on Apis mellifera. And why is no one talking about this? Right, so it's a mite, it's just like varroa mite. Why is no one talking about it? It's not impacting any developed country. It's not impacting massive commercial pollination industries in countries where they have massive news media that gets into our media. I guarantee you, if this was in America, you'd all know about it. If this was in New Zealand, you'd all know about it. But in fact, it's right on our doorstep. It's right next to us. It's actually spreading at the same rate that varroa destructor spread. It's also spreading in the same order of countries. That's pretty concerning. So I'm going to show you a little video, and it's pretty hard. This is footage I took from the Eastern Highlands province, Papua New Guinea. You can see these tiny little bugs running around. How much honey do you think those bees are going to be collecting? Not a whole awful lot. They're tiny, they move way faster than varroa, they reproduce and reinfest colonies way faster than varroa. They're very messy feeders in comparison to varroa. So varroa, when they feed on a pupae, they go back to the same feeding site. Whereas these ones just bite the thing all over, right? And you could imagine if you're a baby and you've got little antennas and things like that that are developing, being bitten actually means that when you come out, you're a cripple. And an antenna or a leg is very important to a bee when it gets older. Of all the viruses that have been tested that this mite can transmit, all of them have shown positive that they can transmit the different viruses, just the way that varroa does. But yet no one's talking about this. So I'm just trying to emphasize the importance of doing research away from Australia, not just in Australia, because we need to know what to do if this bug comes, right? It's really important that this knowledge and skills is not just in another country, that we have local people here that can get up in front of industry and really go, look, we're going to be all right. There's going to be things that we can do about this. So that's Tropilaelaps. I wanted to ask the question, who's responsible for biosecurity?
I would have said everyone.
I would have said everyone too. Absolutely. It's all of us. We are all responsible for biosecurity. Understanding and knowing what we have and what we don't have is really important. And every pair of eyes is a set of biosecurity, and it's part of our strength in a national system to be able to keep things out and ensure that we have early detection. And working together, just like a beehive does to identify things, is pretty well the best security that we have. So what we're trying to do in these partner countries, this is me doing training here with the Biosecurity Authority Fiji. We have this luxurious thing called a National Honeybee Pest Surveillance Program, which is levied by industry, matched by government, and it provides a bit of a security net. It provides training. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's an amazing system that exists, and it does do a good job, and it doesn't exist in many other countries around us. And so we don't want things just randomly spreading across the Pacific, impacting on people's lives and becoming an increasing threat to Australia. So that's why we're trying to upskill people in other countries and their programs as well around Australia. There's very clear research that's out there for anyone who's really passionate about biosecurity, but the return on investment for pre-border biosecurity significantly outweighs post-border biosecurity. What does that mean? It means keeping bugs out before they come is good money. It's good value for money. Once it gets here, it's very, very expensive to basically manage. So I just wanted to show you this next map that just highlights the global ecosystem. This is 1 year of just cargo ships, not all the other boats, just cargo ships. That's 1 year. I mean, we might as well live in any of these countries, the amount of stuff that's moving around. So, all right, that's pests and diseases and biosecurity. The next one is genetics and queen bees. And the key thing here has been really to keep bee breeding programs. With the queen bees, basically, I wanted to highlight that making queen bees is not the same thing as queen bee breeding. It's something to differentiate between, right? So just making a queen bee from your best stock, that's great. But actually going out there and doing monitoring and evaluation over time with any type of livestock or crop is what a breeding program is. It's really measuring different traits, right? Like for bees, what color are they? How much do I get stung? How much honey did they produce? And actually keeping lots of measures of that. Because once you layer those numbers up, you can get a value, and basically it's those things that you want to do. So we're working with beekeepers. We've got some new genetics that have gone into Fiji, first time in 30 years. You've got some very happy beekeepers there because the original stock that was introduced was Apis mellifera mellifera, the English black bee, which is pretty cranky and not particularly productive. Now we've got some Italian bees that have come in from Western Australia's breeding program, and some very happy beekeepers ultimately there. We've got a whole range of different bee breeding initiatives there trying to develop a culture of requeening. So this is a practical sort of visualization of some of the results. Got a lot of people doing some training there, wearing a lot of gloves, and then the Australian honeybees came in, some of this Italian stock, and then all of a sudden everyone's gone crazy. It's actually a bit of a joke. But this is, in all seriousness, some very happy beekeepers because they've got some better bees there. They were just terrible, running around on the comb, brood just, very shotgun pattern and not particularly productive, swarming a lot more. I didn't do this research, but I just wanted to share with you, and it's something that we're trying to share with people in the Pacific as well. It's something that everyone should know. But why should we have young queen bees? I mean, why do we produce them? Ultimately, we're trying to make more colonies. We can breed queens to re-queen failing or old queens. We can sell queens to make money, or we might be doing it because we want to improve the stock that we have. So there's probably a lot of other reasons as well. But this is a study that was done in '94. I was what, 1 year? I was 1 year of age when this amazing study came out. And what it shows consistently across these 2 years, 1983 and 84, is that young queen bees make more honey. End of story. So it's really clear research that's out there on this. So do you know how old your queens are? Lots of people in the Pacific understand that chickens don't lay eggs forever. And it's also not very productive to spend a lot of time and money feeding them if they're not optimally productive. So this is a culture of requeening is really important, is the point I'm trying to make. This slide is a little bit more technical, but I won't dwell on it for too long. But I just wanted to highlight that we'll skip to this one. So what we're really looking at here is this timeline here on day 28. The key thing here is when you're buying queen bees, it's good to ask the bee breeder that's selling you queen bees how old their queens are. The reason for this is that this amazing study that was done, this is by Rode and Somerville. I think I did have the citation on that last page. It demonstrates that if you pull a queen that's just mated out of a colony sooner, she will die much sooner. It's got a much less chance of surviving ultimately over a short period of time being introduced initially, and then also longer term after 15 weeks. So when you're buying queen bees, it's good to make sure that that queen is at least 28 days of age is the recommendation. So it's a really cool piece of research that came out that not a lot of people are aware of, and it's got a lot of implications. I mean, I hate to say it, but I've done it myself. You buy queen bees and you put them out there and they don't all work. It costs a bomb. Go and spend $1,000 on queens and they come back, they're not all there. It's pretty heartbreaking. The next one is education, training, extension. So we've got education, training, extension. This is just a small number of photos of about 1 million. It's really about working with trainers to be able to give their own training. And part of this is building training into part of their business models and that sort of thing, working with universities and things like that as well, like Tocal College, the equivalent that we have over there, to be able to give some of this training and really focusing on outcome-based training, core skills, beekeeping training as a part of their business model, so that when the programs end, it's not just going to stop. It's going to keep going because they've set it up as a part of their business model. So it keeps on going. There's a whole range of reasons why training is very ineffective. This is a summary of a publication, and what I've done is, rather than chew your ear off around all the methodologies and all that sort of thing, I've just basically summarized all the significant results and sciencey stuff into a bunch of emojis. So it's pretty easy to sort of understand. What we did was, this is a survey, the first industry survey. It's a snapshot. If you Google Australian honeybee industry snapshot, it's a similar thing to what we're doing up there in PNG, trying to understand what's going on. And we did a survey with a lot of different households. We did 117 different beekeepers and a whole bunch of different information that came back. And what I was looking for is different responses that beekeepers were saying around what their operations look like and what were factors influencing the amount of money that they were making, how much honey they were making, and how many beehives they owned. There was things that I was trying to look for, right? So on average, 85% said they use honey as a form of a bank, and honey acts as security in times of financial hardship. Beekeepers own on average 13 bee colonies, and they're making around $715 US per year each on average, right? This is in a context where the GDP per capita, the average income per person, is $2,340. So you can imagine that's really significant and important income for people. What we found was that people's years of experience is correlated with the amount of money that they're making from beekeeping. So beekeepers have got more years of experience and making more money from bees, obviously. Beekeepers who own their own land or their own apiaries were making more honey than those that did not. Having access to a vehicle or honey collection services was a significant predictor of honey yields. Knowing why and how to supplementary feed bees was a significant indicator of how much honey they're producing. And there's lots of reasons why that might be. Owning protective equipment meant they had more hives. And interestingly, down the bottom there, obviously being able to make splits meant they had more hives. Owning more than one apiary was a significant factor influencing all three of those things, how much money they make. And so that really tells you that they're making more money when they're putting their bees on different flows. Also, the really interesting one is mentioning interest as a reason for starting beekeeping. Who's good at beekeeping? People who love bees. It makes a lot of sense. But these programs don't have selection criteria processes. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you want to become a beekeeper, right? I mean, it's a good way to become poor. No, I'm just joking. But ultimately, these programs don't necessarily have selection criteria processes. So they just go out there as a village, they're poor, maybe they want to get into bees. But one of the best things you can do is really try to find those people that actually have a passion for bees. Sounds obvious, but a lot of people in programs are not doing that. This is another one, and I think this is something we could do here in Australia more and across other agricultural sectors as well. This is a study, this is a very basic diagram, but ultimately what we did was really cool. We had all the beekeeping trainers in Fiji come together that are doing training, and they gave each other peer-to-peer feedback. They had to do a theoretical topic and then a practical, and all their peers gave them feedback around how they could improve, and they shared resources and that sort of thing. What was interesting is that it demonstrated that a really cool, participatory way of improving the training, but also that training actually is a really important form of income. They're actually making more money from beekeeping training in terms of their investment on time, which is really important. And so there's a paper there. Obviously, if you go and read this paper, you're going to get a lot more detail. I'm just trying to make you aware of it, not chew your ear off about it. So there's a paper there. You can go and check that out for free. I'll send you the link. This is a paper that I did that was reviewing all the literature that's been published out there, peer-reviewed stuff, other scientists say whether it's good or not, and it gets published, and it's looking at other papers that were peer-reviewed, and they were looking at what factors were influencing beekeeping welfare, right? What was influencing the amount of money that they were making, the number of hives they had, or the amount of honey, right? And what was really interesting is that obviously the number of beehives is going to be, you got more beehives, you're going to make more money. That makes a lot of sense. If you look at the next one, there's actually no science or peer-reviewed papers out there that say that participating in a honey cooperative helps. There's actually 5 papers that said that it didn't, which is quite interesting. I mean, the amount of interventions that you see overseas that are talking about, getting honey cooperatives together or grouping beekeepers together to work together. I mean, I'd find it hard to work with more than one other beekeeper that I didn't know. It'd be pretty difficult. I mean, just sharing my honey extractor, geez, you'd have to wash that out. But, this is an interesting one. Obviously, years of experience, household size. There's some things in there where you have evidence for both. So, an interesting one was education. Beekeeping training days. So you can see the number of beekeeping training days. There was 2 papers that said that the number of training days that you go to influences your outcomes in beekeeping. And there's 2 publications that said that it didn't, which was really interesting. So, I mean, that really just highlights what I was talking about before in terms of improving the effectiveness of beekeeping. And the research I've done has really shown that simply doing more training is not going to help farmers. Because you go back and they haven't learned a lot of skills. It's not outcome based. You can get a certificate without demonstrating you have the skills. You really need to demonstrate. The beekeeper's not learning anything unless they have a hive tool in their hand. Talk about something briefly, demonstrate the skill. They need to practice that skill, and then you can give them feedback on that. So really having outcome-based training that focuses on core skills is really important. This is a survey that I did of people like me that work in beekeeping for development. There are lots of people that work all across the world that are employed by lots of NGOs and agencies, and they go to other countries trying to help people through beekeeping. And what I did was I surveyed these people. So there was 52 people responded to this, draws on more than 750 years of collective beekeeping research, practitioner experience. And this is what they thought was some of the key attributes in the success of beekeeping programs. Availability of floral resources, ensuring that there's ongoing follow-up support and extension. I mean, most successful beekeepers can identify a mentor. Usually, I know I can. Most beekeepers out there that are pretty good, they usually had someone that helped them over time. It wasn't just one training day that they went to. Just changing seasons and having mentoring over that. This was another one from Papua New Guinea. I'm not going to go into lots of detail in this, but basically what we were doing is looking at varroa and Tropilaelaps management strategies that using chemical controls, but also some non-chemical control methods. Why? Because most people up there don't have access to these chemical treatments. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to afford them a lot of the time. And even if they could afford them, you know, you need to make sure that the education extension training is out there for them to use it properly at the end of the day, right? So this is a study that showed that actually for managing Tropilaelaps, there's some non-chemical methods that work very effectively, in fact, on par or if not better than chemical control methods. But often the results are not sustained because of the biology of that mite. This is a master's student of mine, Jordana Hinton. She's looking at financial services for beekeeping operations in Fiji. So another PhD student of mine, Annalise Austin, she's doing some amazing stuff in social inclusion in beekeeping, and wanted to highlight that the evidence is very clear that women are disproportionately affected by poverty throughout the world. There's no arguing that fact. It's just the reality. There's facts and data on this. And so ensuring that women have equal access to resources and decision-making is a direct route for getting all people out of poverty. And also even here in Australia and on the organisations that we work in, we know that those organisations that draw equally on the talents of both women and men at all levels will outperform those businesses that do not. So this is a major challenge. It's even Australia, you know, it's mostly a male-dominated industry, but it doesn't have to be that way. We've got a lot of policies and, you know, awareness in this country, but in lots of other places too. You know, we really need to make sure that we're benefiting and supporting everyone. I'm doing a talk this week down in Sydney at the New South Wales AA. It's also about getting skilled labour. Access to skilled labour in the Australian honeybee industry is a huge problem. It's a major problem. In order for us to expand and grow our horticultural industries that require bees to be there, we need more people to do that, and we need more beekeepers managing bees. So as part of these programs is also capacity building for people overseas. We've got beekeeping eligible now under the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme. So we've got beekeepers here working in Australia that go back and share skills and that sort of thing. So just to summarize and wrap it up for you guys, obviously bees have a lot more to offer than just honey. They've got low environmental impact. They're almost one of the most mutualistic forms of agriculture globally, critical to food and nutrition security, lots of different benefits, but you can't just leave bees in a paddock to be healthy and happy and productive. You really need to, look after them. So thanks for having me, everyone.